Hey, so a few days ago, I recorded a video, and I realized sometimes I think I'm gonna have to do intros because what happens is I'll record a video, not quite knowing what I'm talking about at the beginning of it, or thinking I'm talking about one, or thinking that I'm going to talk about one thing, and then it kind of shifts shortly into the start of the video, and that's what happened this time. So a few days ago, I recorded a video, and pretty early into the video, the trajectory of that recording changed. Sorry, I said that wrong. Changed, and so I want to have a little intro just to kind of talk about what I'm going to end up talking about in this video, which again I already recorded, so now it's just the intro. But anyway, so a few days ago I talked about, and the point of this video is that I've noticed, because I'm very into elements of spirituality, even though there are a lot of problems that I find in spirituality, I still believe in many elements of spirituality. But one of the problems that I have with spirituality is the massive emotional suppression taking place in the spiritual community. And honestly, I think it's heart engagement is really a better way to put it. Is the spiritual community is engaging the heart, and very violently. Actually, I think it's violent. And so I talked about that a little bit in this video. And when I say violent, it's not obvious. What I mean when I say violent is it's training itself to be violent. And the reason I think the spiritual community is training itself into violence is that it's training itself, a lot of spiritual people are training themselves to ignore the heart and ignore the heart's suffering in a world that does have quite a bit of suffering in it. And they're leaning so far into a state of very, very toxic positivity. And I find this to be very disturbing in the spiritual community because, and I explain this in depth in the video. It's going to be like an hour long. So I don't really need to explain it too much in the intro because it'll be in the video in a few minutes. But that being said, there is like a very high level of toxic positivity in the spiritual community. And that was a big part of what I ended up talking about in this video. But where I find that toxic positivity is manifesting. I think most of manifesting is training spiritual people, or even people who aren't spiritual, but typically people who manifest are spiritual. So manifesting is actually teaching most of the time, in my opinion. I think most of the time, the manifesting out there is teaching people to silence the heart through a very corrupted form of toxic positivity. And I'm quite upset about this. And so it's not that I think all manifesting is bad. I don't. But I think that well over half of manifesting is highly corrupted. But I think it's a lot more than half. I think honestly it's 80, maybe even 90, maybe even 95%. There are days I think it's 95%. But I think pretty easily it's at least 80%. So I think most of the manifesting out there is very corrupted. And this isn't to say don't manifest. This also isn't to say, okay, there are only a few types of manifesting you can do and otherwise you can't do them. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that because I believe that most manifesting silences the heart and really encages the heart, you need to learn to develop your heart space to know what the difference is. Is this a form of manifesting that's getting you closer to your heart, or is it a form of manifesting that's getting you further away from your heart and it's really killing the heart? I think a lot of manifesting is killing the heart, which is going to lessen your capacity for love, because the more you lessen your connection to your heart, which nurtures love more than any other part of your soul, in my opinion, then by lessening your connection to your heart, and really by killing your heart, you're lessening your capacity to love, and you're creating a less loving world. And in my opinion, that's what the vast majority of spiritual people are doing right now with manifesting. And honestly, I think because manifesting is so popular within spirituality, that's what most spiritual people are doing. Like most of the really, really spiritual people, like the people who do I'm not talking about someone who meditates once a month. I'm not talking about someone who goes out and grounds a couple days out of the month. I'm not talking about people who do a few little spiritual practices here and there. I'm talking about the spiritual people who pretty obviously are spiritual, like they believe in a lot of spiritual concepts, and they practice them like some spiritual concept like every single day, probably multiple every single day. Those spiritual people, the spiritual people who are very, very spiritual and who have been spiritual for, I'd say, at least a couple years doing that, those spiritual people are the ones that I worry about, because those spiritual people, in my opinion, more often than not, are massively disconnected from the heart space and are becoming less and less connected from the heart. And it's not that spirituality is bad by nature. It's that there is this corruption that's found its way into spirituality, and it's largely through toxic positivity. There's toxic negativity and there's toxic positivity, but you don't want to be on either end there. You want to try to find a state of balance, and that is to anchor yourself into the heart. And yeah, you're human, so you're not perfect. You might be a touch toxically positive or a touch toxically negative, but it's just like by a hair. But I don't think that most spiritual people are like a hair into the toxic positive space. I think they're like miles upon miles upon miles, into toxic positivity. They are robustly toxically positive. And it's truly, evil is a harsh word, but I almost want to say evil, because it is really training a lot of people. A lot of spiritual people are becoming disconnected from the heart through this toxic positivity. And like I said, the more you disconnect from the heart, the more unloving you become. And the path to evil is to become less loving. Do you want to become less loving? I hope not. Right? And I think most spiritual people are actually through toxic positivity. And a lot of this toxic positivity you find within manifesting. I think a lot of spiritual people are training themselves to become way, way less loving. And that's not a good thing. Because you want to become more loving in your lifetime, not less loving. And most spiritual people, I think, without realizing it, are becoming less loving. But it's less loving with a smile on their face. It's not obvious unless you're very in tune with your heart. I think it's obvious. And thank God there are some people in the spiritual community who recognize the toxic positivity, but most don't. And anyway, so that's what I was talking about in this video. And I wanted to create the introduction here, and I'm sorry it's a little chaotic because I'm just kind of talking about a bunch of stuff at once. I get scattered. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, and I have a hard time trying to contain them into a video. And because I'm not totally used to public speaking yet, I find myself doing that quite a bit, where I get a little scattered and I lose my train of thought. But also I have stage fright, which I think makes me kind of get scattered as well. But anyway, so another reason I wanted to create this intro is because I realized that at the start of the video that I recorded a few days ago, which is this video in the next few minutes when this intro is done, is that I realized that I was very upset in that moment. When I recorded the video, I was upset. I was upset with the spiritual community. And I do realize that not all of the spiritual community is bad. But I think there is a very poisonous element to the spiritual community, and I think that's toxic positivity. So anyway, I was talking at the start of the video. Within a few minutes of the video, I mentioned a criticism of a spiritual influencer. I didn't say the person's name. I would not do that. I would not say, if I say anything negative on here about anybody, I would never actually name the person. I would not identify the person, because that would be slander, and I don't want to slander. But I was maybe not very, but I was definitely critical of someone without saying the person's name, But it's like it's a spiritual influencer, and it's a spiritual influencer who has like hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. So it's not a small influencer. It's like she's got close to, I think, like she's got multiple hundreds of thousands of followers. She's got like 300,000 followers, I think. So yeah, so she's not a small influencer by any stretch. But I was critical of this person because, without saying her name, and I guess I felt a little self-conscious after the fact about the fact that I had been so critical. And now that I'm saying this in the intro, I feel like I'm being even more critical. And then I'm just like, well, I feel like I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm making it worse, by trying to overcorrect or something. But anyway, but the point is, I was a little critical at the beginning of the video about someone without saying that person's name. But that being said, in the video, I also, because I was being very negative initially in the video, I had things that I wanted to say, as a solution. And so it's not just that the spiritual community and manifesting is all bad, and I'm just going to leave you with just negative, concepts. I discussed what I think is the solution to this, and it's not hard. And I'll briefly say what it is now, but I explained it in more detail in the video. But it's basically basically prayer for yourself, prayer for others. If you believe in God, prayer for God. I believe in God, but prayer for yourself, prayer for others, and prayer for God. Again, if you believe in God. And then operating from a place of love, being a vessel of love in the world, and using your heart to find that. But to use your heart, you have to be in tune with your negative emotions and really allow them to speak to you. And unfortunately, most of spirituality is so focused on the positive, but is actually using the positive emotions to silence the suffering, the expression of the suffering within the heart. And that's what concerns me, I think, most, or close to most, but I would say most within the spiritual community. So anyway, that was the point of this video. I also mentioned a couple people that I follow who I really, really like, later in the video, and they're good people, I think, to go and look at their content, because they offer, I think, really wonderful insight. So anyway, and I learned from them. So I mentioned a couple people in this video, that are positive that I've learned from. But anyway, the one person that I said something negative about, I did not say that person's name. All I did was basically say that she has 300,000 followers. That was about it. And that she's spiritual. But anyway, and that she manifests. But anyway, so I hope this intro wasn't too chaotic. But I just wanted to kind of explain the gist of this video, because it wasn't clear at the start of the video. But anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll let you listen to the rest of the recording if you want to. All right, thank you. Hi, so today I want to talk about something that's probably going to be a shorter video. I feel like a lot of my videos are pretty long, but I don't think this is going to be a really long video, knock on wood, but I don't think it's going to be more than about 15-20 minutes. It might be less than that. And again, I'm outside, so if you hear birds and dogs barking, that is why, because the neighborhood behind our house has a lot of dogs in the houses there. So anyway, we have cats at my parents' house, but the dogs are our neighbor's dogs. But anyway, so I want to talk now about something that I saw earlier when I was scrolling through Instagram, and I was kind of, I don't know, I was upset by something I saw, and I see this all the time, to be honest, very, very often anyway. I scroll through Instagram, and because I follow some spiritual accounts, of course, I'm going to see, spiritual bypassing and heart disconnection, because that is has become almost synonymous with spirituality, which is why I hesitate to call myself spiritual, because I am, as I've said in several of my videos, I am very upset with the spiritual community right now because of how disconnected from the heart the spiritual community has become. And again, I am fairly spiritual, but I'm very careful about the spiritual content that I follow, in the sense that I am careful about what I choose to take and apply to my life of the things that I have learned from spirituality. So there are some things I learned from spirituality that benefit, I think, my life, and I do agree with, but there are a lot of things that I think are basically poison that have found them, it's poisonous ideas that have found their way into spirituality. And I'm very upset at the fact that and again, I do think it is poison. I'm very upset that this poison has really polluted the spiritual community. And the poison that has polluted, interesting that I almost said the word colluded. I do think that there is ill intention in the spiritual community. I do think there are some people, who knows, right? But I do think that that the spiritual community was intentionally corrupted. But a lot of people in the spiritual community don't realize this. But again, I think I've said this elsewhere, that when a school of thought, when a school of thought gets big enough, that it does naturally, unfortunately, not naturally, but it tends to open itself up to corruption, which is why you have to be so careful and heart-led in your approach to what you're learning, because if you just blindly follow, you're likely to consume that poison, right? And so there are poisonous ideas within spirituality. There are poisonous ideas, in my opinion. There are poisonous ideas within the Bible. There are poisonous ideas within Christianity. There are poisonous ideas within various religions. I'm more aware of Christianity, and I believe in so many elements of Christianity, but even Christianity has been corrupted. Even the Bible, in my opinion, has been corrupted over the 1500 plus years. I don't know how long the Bible's been around, but anyway, like close to 2000, right, years that the Bible's been around, and its various updates, or whatever you want to call it, rewrites, it's been corrupted. And the spiritual community has pretty obviously been corrupted too. And I said this elsewhere, politics have been corrupted. Neither side is fully right? I'm not going to say my political beliefs yet anyway. I probably will at some point, but I don't feel like it now. But both sides have been corrupted, right? I think one side's been more corrupted than the other. I'm not going to say which, and I'm going to try not to imply which right now. But I do think one side is more corrupted than the other, okay? But that being said, both are corrupted, and both, can become a source of division. And so the point is, when a school of thought gets big enough, it can easily enough become corrupted. Well, the spiritual community has, to my mind, pretty obviously become corrupted through, in a lot of ways, what I consider toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing, which is disconnecting you from the heart. So anyway, there's this woman on Instagram. I was scrolling through Instagram. I will not say her name. I don't agree with slander, so I will not say her name. Plus, hopefully she means well. There's a really good chance that she means well and that she's a good person. I don't know, but I'm just assuming, she seems like she means well. But she's on Instagram. She has like 300,000 followers. She's a spiritual person who has 300,000 followers. Like, that's just like wild to me. A spiritual influencer having 300,000+ followers. I'm like, wow, how do you get there? But anyway, so she's a spiritual person that has over 300,000 followers on Instagram. And so she posts a lot about manifesting. Most of her content is manifesting. And on one hand, I don't want to like say much more about her account because I don't want to accidentally say anything bad to the point where it seemed like it's obvious who she is. But at the same time, I want to point out like how popular she is on Instagram, to point out like how common this thinking really is within spirituality. And so anyway, but I don't think me saying that she has over 300,000 followers and that she talks about manifesting is really going to make it obvious who this person is. I have a hard time believing it would make it obvious. So I think I'm being fair in doing this, but I hope I'm being fair anyway. So I was on Instagram and scrolling through, and there's this woman. I do not follow her on Instagram, but she pops up on my feed quite frequently because I follow other spiritual accounts. So she's, and she's a big account, so of course she's sometimes going to show up on my Instagram feed. And I swear, like every single time I see her pop up on my feed, I almost have to roll my eyes because I try to give her the benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, I've seen her repeatedly post things that I do not like and that I do not agree with, and frankly, I think she's disconnecting from the heart through her manifesting tactics. I have a video where I talked for 2 hours. It's way longer than any of my other videos. Most of my videos are like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And I have this video that's like 2 hours long that I haven't posted yet. And sorry, I'm very scattered, but I have a lot of thoughts. So anyway, but I have this video that's like 2 hours long, or like an hour and 50 minutes, basically 2 hours. I'm not sure. I haven't put it up yet. But I really need to because it's pretty much finished. I just haven't had it edited, and that's really the only reason that it's not up yet. Also, I'm probably a little nervous, like on a subconscious level. I'm probably a little nervous about putting it up. But basically, in this like 2-hour video, I talk about all the heart corruption that takes place through almost every form of manifesting, and about how dangerous manifesting is for the most part, how dangerous it is, and not that all of it's dangerous, but I think most of it is. Sorry, but I think most of it is. And so anyway, so I have this video that I really need to put up, and it's February right now, and I need to put it up this month. I think I will put it up this month. I finished it like the very end of January, if I'm not mistaken, but it's February 2025, and I need to put it up. But anyway, so the point is, like, and again, I'm so sorry, I'm a little scattered, but it's just, I don't know. I didn't sleep well, and I'm outside, and it's cold because I'm always outside, but it's really, really cold, and it's harder to think. I think I'm more scattered when it's cold out because I'm shivering when I'm trying to do these videos and my hands get cold, and anyway, so it's distracting. But, yeah, So I came inside because it was really, really cold. And so anyway, I just couldn't focus because it was so cold. But I'm not used to doing videos inside because it's just, honestly, it's easier for me to think when I'm outside. I think it takes my mind off, I think, the stage fright a little bit when I'm outside and like around the birds, because we have tons of birds in our yard. There are probably at least 30 birds like by the feeder. I'm not even exaggerating. By the bird feeder in the front yard during the daytime. So anyway, so it helps me think when I'm outside, but it's just too cold. So I'm inside now. And anyway, so I'm going to try to explain this because I really feel like I need to talk about it now, but it's just too cold for me to handle being outside right now. So anyway, so I was trying to talk before about manifesting, and basically manifesting, the problem, and that's not the point of the video. The point of the video is not manifesting, but it lends itself to what I want to talk about. So this video might be longer than I thought it was going to be. It might be longer than 20 minutes, but I feel like there's a good chance I'll be able to keep it less than 30 minutes, but we'll see. But anyway, so very briefly, I want to talk about manifesting again, because I have a really long video on it already that I'm going to put up soon, so I don't really need to go into much detail right now, probably. But manifesting, the short explanation of it is that manifesting, in my opinion, disconnects you from the heart through toxic positivity and through not valuing your heart's voicing of its pain. And so I say this in a lot of my videos, I'm starting to realize, and I think it's a good idea for me to say this because it takes a few minutes to do it, and I think it's very helpful. But I try to talk about, sorry, I didn't say that right. I try to talk about the heart and the role of the heart to help explain the role of your emotions. So the heart pumps, in my opinion, just like the heart in the physical world, we all know the heart pumps blood in the physical world, which helps distribute oxygen, helps distribute nutrients, and it helps detoxify you in the physical world through the pumping of blood by the physical heart. Well, there's also a spiritual heart or an etheric heart, right? And so the spiritual heart or the etheric heart pumps, in my opinion, it pumps love throughout your soul. And I believe that love comes from God because I believe in God. So I believe that love is actually pumped continually from God through us. But even if you don't believe in God, at the very least, like I believe that that love is pumped through our soul by the heart in the spiritual sense. And so through this pumping of love, the heart grows to embody love more than any other part of the soul grows to embody love. Now, the mind could be second to the heart, but unfortunately, the mind through the ego has learned to oppress the heart. And which is where you get a lot of problems in society and disconnection from others. But honestly, I think it's where you get a lot of that emotional suppression in the spiritual community. And honestly, I think and I said this in another video at the end of another video, but I briefly talked about how the heart the mind in the spiritual community through heart suppression, through emotional suppression, has become the very machine they claim to be leaving or escaping from. The spiritual community has become the machine of society that uses the mind to suppress the heart. So just like in normal society, the mind oftentimes suppresses the heart, the spiritual community is doing the same damned thing by using the mind to suppress the heart through toxic positivity. Now, there's such a thing as toxic negativity too, but I think it's very obvious, in my opinion, that the spiritual community has become the realm of toxic positivity. So anyway, so the heart is used in the soul. The heart is what pumps. I think it's God's mission for the heart is for the heart to pump love throughout the soul. And because it pumps love throughout the soul, it grows to embody love more than any other part of the soul. Now, God's role, in my opinion, God's intention behind the heart and the mind is for them to be connected. And I heard someone say, and I really like her actually, this is different. So I'm going to talk about a few people, and I don't want anyone to think like one person's the other person. I'm going to talk about a few people who have positively, or at least a couple people I think, who have positively influenced me. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a couple people who have positively, sorry, I didn't say that right. I slur my words. I think I get a little ahead of myself when I do these videos and I kind of jumble my words together. But in this video, I think I'm going to talk about a couple people who have positively influenced me in the spiritual community. But obviously, earlier in this video, I talked about someone in the spiritual community who I don't agree with. However, there are many people in the spiritual community I do agree with. So right now I'm going to talk about someone I do agree with in the spiritual community, And I'm probably going to talk about a couple people actually I agree with in the spiritual community. So I don't want you to think I'm talking about someone else. I don't want anyone to think when I'm talking about the person I do agree with, I don't want anyone to think I'm talking about the person I don't agree with. So anyway, right now I'm talking about someone I do agree with. And so anyway, so there's this account. There's a woman who has a account. I don't even know if she has an Instagram. So it's not the woman I was talking about before, but this is someone that I do like. But she has a YouTube channel and she talks about God on it quite often. But a more spiritual approach to God, but she still talks about God a lot. And so anyway, she was talking about how, God is I can't remember exactly how she said it, but like the divine father, because I believe there's a divine mother and a divine father, God, but there's a feminine aspect to God and a masculine aspect to God. And that's my opinion too, but a lot of spiritual people believe this. And so she believes this as well. And so she was saying that that God, the feminine aspect to God, or like the divine mother aspect to God, is found within the heart, and the divine father aspect to God is found within the mind. And sorry, I almost got like a tickle in my throat or something. But anyway, so her name or her account is Spiritual Growth Journeys, I think. Anyway, I followed her for a long time. I don't watch every single video of hers, but I watch a lot of her videos and I like her content. So anyway, so she talked about this, and she talked about how the Father God is in the mind, is represented by the mind, and the Mother God, the Divine Mother, is represented by the heart. And so I was thinking about this like a few weeks ago or whatever, because I'd been thinking a lot about the heart. And I was thinking about how like the mind is being used in the spiritual community to suppress the heart space. And so anyway, so like, but I believe that we're supposed to have a fusion. I think just like the Divine Mother and the Divine Father come like together, and through their unity, create the essence of love, the essence that is love. That love gets pumped through our souls. And that love is the inner child. I believe love is the inner child of God. And so anyway, so love gets pumped by the heart space, which is more of that Divine Mother energy. That Mother God energy is within the heart in a lot of ways. And so it's pumped by the heart. This love is pumped by the heart space. But the mind is here as the protector of the heart and of love in that creative energy, through helping to like support and protect the Divine Mother role and the love role in society through the heart space. And so there's this fusion, and they come together, both the Divine Father in the mind and the Divine Mother in the heart. In that fusion, support and nurture and protect love, which is the inner child of existence. Love is the inner child of existence, in my opinion. Well, unfortunately, what's happening in the spiritual community is the spiritual community, not all of the spiritual community, just a large portion of the spiritual community, is using is using the mind to suppress the heart. And so now I think it's fitting for me to just talk about that and then get back to the point I was trying to say about toxic positivity. So as I often do when I record these videos, I paused the video and I went back and listened to what I had recorded so far. I have to do that like every 10 minutes or so. It just helps me think, and kind of, because I lose my train of thought very, very easily, especially when I do these videos. So anyway, so it helps me kind of regroup a little bit. But anyway, so I was listening back to what I had just said, and I realized I kind of unintentionally made it sound like in the last few minutes of the video, like I don't like the spiritual community. I love the spiritual community. I love so many elements of spirituality, but like I said before, spirituality has become poisoned. It's not all of spirituality that is the problem. It's the poison that has made its way into the spiritual community. And the poison in the spiritual community is, I think I said at the beginning of the video, I believe the poison that has made its way into the spiritual community is that toxic positivity that is suppressing the heart. And so anyway, and I talked about that a lot in the 2-hour manifesting video that I haven't put online yet, but I should this month. Again, it's February 2025, so I should have it up sometime this month. And so anyway, that, and I lost my train of thought again, sorry. But anyway, so that like toxic positivity is, basically the duct tape over the mouth of the heart. And I said this in the manifesting video. I talked about how through toxic positivity, and you could argue toxic negativity does this as well. It's just in the spiritual community, it is toxic positivity. And toxic positivity is almost just like, people don't understand how dangerous positivity can be when it's out of balance. And because toxic positivity is its own way of silencing the heart space. And so anyway, so toxic positivity is like the duct tape and cage around the heart. And that is because, in my opinion, the spiritual community is basically putting the heart in a steel cage, and putting duct tape on the mouth of the heart and saying, don't you say anything negative, right? And I'm so frustrated by this because the spiritual community has basically, through manifesting, and again, not all manifesting is bad, but I think the vast majority of manifesting is very corrupted. And I don't know what the percentage is. I have no idea, but I think it is well over 50%. And there are a lot of times where honestly, I think it's 80 to 90%, maybe even more than 90%. But I don't know. Okay. But I do feel like a huge percentage of the manifesting out there is very, very dangerous, which is why I don't mess with manifesting really at all. It's not that manifesting is necessarily bad, but it oftentimes is, because most manifesting is a form of toxic positivity. So anyway, but there is a form of good manifesting. Even though I think good manifesting is relatively rare, there is a good form of manifesting. And so I'm going to offer an alternative, not offer it like, I mean, it was already there, but I'm going to talk about another form of manifesting that I found out about that is a form of manifesting I am comfortable with. And that's basically prayer for yourself, prayer for others, and operating from a place of love. So anyway, this form of manifesting is a form of manifesting I learned of from someone else I really, really like, who's like a massive role model. And so this person, again, is someone that I think is awesome. And anyway, so this person talks about manifesting sometimes. She doesn't talk about it a lot. It's not the main content of her like social media or whatever, but she talks about it sometimes. But this person actually talks about whales and dolphins and like mermaids and stuff like that. Really cool. But anyway, that's most of her content, I feel like. But she talks sometimes about manifesting. And so this person's name is Beth Catherine on YouTube, and it's Catherine with a K. So Beth Catherine with a K, and her Instagram account, I think, is Dolphin Rose Temple with little periods in between. So like dolphin.rose.temple. I think that's what her Instagram account is called. But anyway, but her name on YouTube is Beth Catherine with a K. And she talks about manifesting, a manifesting alternative, which is basically prayer for yourself, prayer for others, and from my understanding, operating from a place of love, and being a vessel of love in the world. And Her video on that is called, I think it's Lemurian versus, I never know if I'm pronouncing Lemurian right, but anyway, Lemurian, whatever it is, Lemurian versus Atlantean manifesting. And so if you look that up, you'll find her content on that. And she has a couple videos where she talks about that. And basically she offers a manifesting alternative. She still calls it manifesting, but it's not what most manifesting is. Because most manifesting, in my opinion, suppresses the heart space. But her form of manifesting does not. Because her form of manifesting is so beautifully and so simply, for the most part, prayer for yourself, prayer for others. And then on top of that, being a vessel of love in the world. Love for others and love for yourself. And so I found out about her manifesting account, her manifesting content and about her account only a few months ago. I think I found her account in September of 2024. So it was just like 5 months ago. And it was interestingly at a time when I was starting to think maybe I should manifest, because I felt, when you have this kind of initial like repulsion, you're like, there's something really wrong about this. Your spidey senses are going off and you're like, this is wrong. This is corrupt. I don't know why, but I feel it in my gut. And then at some point you're like, well, let me give it a chance. And then it comes around and bites you in, the back or whatever. And you're like, okay, I guess I should have listened to my gut. Well, that's kind of what I think was happening with manifesting, because back in like August, September 2024, after a couple of years just feeling like, oh, I really shouldn't manifest, something about manifesting just felt really yucky. But I kept thinking, well, let me give it a chance, maybe someday, maybe. But it just didn't feel right. Like something about it just felt wrong, but I couldn't really pinpoint it, but it just was like, no, I don't like it. It feels like emotional suppression. It doesn't feel like a loving God. It just feels wrong. And then I thought, you know what, let me try it. And this was back in August or September. I think it was September, and I'm not kidding. Like a day or two after I started thinking maybe I should manifest, I found Beth Catherine's Instagram account, which is dolphin.rose.temple, and her alternative to manifesting. And she talked about the very issues that I intuitively felt were a problem within manifesting, about how it kind of suppresses the heart. And I don't think she necessarily said that it suppresses the heart, but she talked about how it's sort of like not nurturing the heart space, I think is the way she termed it. So anyway, I saw that and I started kind of mulling over it and thinking a lot about it. And I realized, like, I don't know, after a month or so, I just could not stop thinking about how the spiritual community is just massively suppressing the heart space. I shouldn't say just massively suppressing, but it is massively suppressing the heart space. And I'm really disgusted by this. I'm very angry that so much of the spiritual community is suppressing the heart. And I understand that people don't know. I mean, I understand it's how a lot of spiritual people have been taught, but I think it is so sad that this is happening. And so anyway, so manifesting, in short, manifesting oftentimes, and in my opinion, the majority of the time, manifesting is training you to, rather than look at your emotions and allow yourself to, and I'm going to say this part because I realized I didn't really talk about this. So the heart is like it pumps love through the soul. So that love gets wounded. In a world of suffering, which we obviously have here on earth, that love gets wounded. And so there's wounded love, and then there's like nurtured and healed love. Well, the wounded love, in that expression, the wounded love, it needs, just like a child needs to be nurtured, because again, inner child of God is love, in my opinion. And so that inner child needs to be nurtured and healed when it is wounded. And so what's happening is this wounded love is expressed by sadness, a sense of doubt, a sense of lack, a sense of confusion, anger, and even fear. Honestly, I think fear can be, not all the time, but sometimes fear is an actual emotion felt within the heart. And so that emotion felt within the heart, rooted in the heart, needs to be nurtured and healed. And to be nurtured to become healed, so it needs to be nurtured to become healed. And to be nurtured, it needs to be heard and understood and sympathized with and held and loved. And unfortunately, what the spiritual community is doing on a large scale through this toxic positivity that you find a lot of within manifesting, the spiritual community is saying to the sadness and to the fear and to the anger and to the sense of doubt and the sense of lack and the sense of confusion. So to the sense of confusion, it's saying that it needs to, basically the spiritual community through manifesting is telling all these air quotes negative emotions felt by the heart. It is telling basically the heart to shut up. And now, to be fair, yes, a lot of our negative emotions like sadness, sense of doubt, sense of lack, anger, confusion, fear, those negative emotions can be exaggerated by our mind. And that's what happens when you are chronically in a victim state, when your heart doesn't want you to be in a victim state anymore and you just stay there. And I would argue, I know there are going to be people, or I imagine there are going to be people who disagree with this, and I might change my mind here, but I don't think I will. I think that your heart does sometimes want you to feel in a victim state. And the reason I say this is because it doesn't want you to stay in a victim state for long, but it wants you to feel the pain of being alone if your heart and if your love is that wounded. You might need to feel that feeling or that sensation of not having support. Now, yes, your heart wants you to lean in on God. Yes, your heart wants you to feel God's presence. However, I'm trying to think of how to explain this because I don't feel like it's coming out right. I'm not saying that you need to be negative. What I'm saying is you need to let your heart feel what it's going to feel. And if you have love that's been that wounded, let's say, imagine, now this is a horrible example because it's painful, but I think it's an important one. Imagine you're homeless, you're sick, you have like nothing, like everything's falling through. And you feel this immense lack of support in your physical world. And you add to that the fact that we have this very thick veil between us and the divine. Now, I do think it's getting thinner, and thank God it's getting thinner, meaning we're getting closer to God in that way, because the veil between our physical reality and the divine is becoming thinner. And yes, the divine's present within the physical world too. That's a whole complex discussion. But in general, like the physical has a lot less of an obvious sense of divinity within it. It's there, but it's less perceivable. And so the veil between the physical understanding of the physical and the divine found within the physical is getting thinner. And so anyway, and also the divine found outside of the physical, right? So the point is we're getting, I think, a thinner veil between the physical and the divine, between our world and that of the divine and that of God. And thank God for that, right? But that being said, we still have quite a thick veil. And so there are a lot of people who are, really sick. They're homeless. They're in a war-torn country. They've got death happening around them. And everything's like falling out from under them. Well, if they're really letting, their heart feel, let's say they weren't brought up to believe in God. Maybe they're an atheist. Well, they would naturally feel the absence of support. And even if they do believe in God, maybe they'd have a hard time feeling God's presence there, right? They believe in God. They'd want to believe he's there. They try, but it's hard. And I think that teaches us that your world really can cause immense suffering in your soul. And the lesson in that, if you're open to it, and I think a lot of spiritual people, unfortunately, are not open to this, and this is what upsets me so much about the spiritual community. And because the spiritual community is not open to this, but I want them to be open to this. Not that no one in the spiritual community is open to this, but a lot of people in the spiritual community are not open to this. But I believe that we need to be open to the idea that to feel and to really embody love, we have to let ourselves feel sympathy for the pain where it comes in. And that means, in a world, and I'm not saying this right, and I don't know, it's hard, I swear it's harder for me to think when I'm inside, and so that's not helping. Also, I love to ground when I do these videos, which also helps me think, and it's really hard because I'm in my living room, and so it's just, it's harder for me to think. But anyway, I think that we need to allow ourselves to feel that pain, right? And to gain sympathy for it. And so what that means is, if you're in a situation where you have pain, like you have sadness, or you have a sense of despair in some way, or confusion, sense of doubt, sense of lack, anger, fear, all of which are natural in a world of suffering. They're natural byproducts of a world of suffering. And our suffering is great here in this world. Now, there's joy too. We need to acknowledge and honor the suffering, but we also need to acknowledge and honor the joy. But if we're really going to support that wounded love, we need to meet it where it is and be that cradle to it, that nurture, to hold it and to sympathize with it and to cry with it. But at the same time, if we feel that wounded love is not naturally wounded love, but instead, or the wounding there, the sadness, the sense of, anger or confusion or doubt, fear, whatever, sense of lack, whatever it is, if it feels like it's not natural to the situation, but instead your mind wanting to stay in a victim state, then you get to talk to that fear or that sadness or that anger and say, hey, I understand there's a root in the reality. I understand some of this pain that you feel is rooted in the heart, and I need to honor that. But I think some of it is being blown out of proportion. So let's try to get back to reality here, right? And that reality is found within the heart, because I do genuinely believe that the heart embodies love more than any other part of the soul. And so that love coming from God and being the inner child of God is served by the heart space, because the heart space, being that divine mother representative or representation, really embodies that love, just like a really nurturing mother carries on and takes on the goodwill and the best interests of the child, and that inner child being love. And the father, the mind, is supposed to be there to support and provide for, and also help with reasoning for the heart space in providing for love, and also just directly with love. And so there's this beautiful fusion that's supposed to take place between the mind and the heart. And the heart is essential to love, but so is the mind in our world. The mind is essential to love, right? But what's happening, and I want to say this because I had listened to an earlier part of my video, and I said that the mind is second to the heart, and I didn't mean it in the sense that so I want to rephrase it, because I don't think that the mind is second to the heart and that it's less than the heart. What I mean is that the mind being more in that creative energy in the physical and providing for and protecting the heart and love in the physical world, it's less in tune with the more divine rooting of love, if that makes sense. And so the heart is a little bit more connected to that. So in that sense, the mind embodies love less than the heart, but the mind is still essential. And so the divine feminine and the divine masculine are essential. I think they're equal. I don't believe the divine feminine is more important than the divine masculine. I don't believe that the divine masculine is more important than the divine feminine. They both are important, and I think equally important. They just serve different roles. However, I think that the heart space sympathizes with love more than the mind is able to. And so in that sense, the mind comes second, if that makes sense. But anyway, so I guess, I hope I didn't overcomplicate this, but it's a complex subject though, so I guess it makes sense that maybe I overcomplicated it, but I'm sorry if I did. But anyway, so the spiritual community through manifesting is unfortunately not really letting those emotions be understood, and instead they're running away from them. And so where maybe their heart needs to express 70% joy and 30% sadness of their situation, the toxic positivity within the manifesting community is telling them, well, you're human, so you're going to feel sadness sometimes, but you want to try and be less in a state of sadness and a lot less in a state of sadness than you are in a state of joy. And so you'll have these people who are manifesting who maybe need to be 70% joyful and 30% sad, and they're off in like 95% delusional joy, out of touch with heart joy, false joy. So they're 95% in a state of joy, where 25% of that is false joy, right? Because they're supposed to be at 70% and they're up at 95% joy. And they're only allowing themselves to feel and honor that 5% sadness when they need to be honoring and feeling 30% sadness. So what happens is you callous the heart in that way, and the heart is less able to pump that love through the soul. And if it's less able to pump that love through the soul comes to embody love less and less and less. And then you add to that the fact that the spiritual community is getting rewarded through, in the physical world, manifesting abundance, through manifesting a house, manifesting, a certain amount of money, manifesting whatever it is. They're getting rewarded in the physical world for it in a very corrupted way, because they're shutting down the heart and lessening their ability to love. And that's really scary. And I talked about this in detail, in depth, in that 2-hour video, which I'm going to publish sometime this month. But sorry, I got a tickle. But anyway, that's kind of the gist of what the problem is with manifesting. So that being said, I want to say something else, which is, so not only is it that it's not hearing that pain and letting it be understood and valued for what it's communicating, so that the soul is able to embody love more. But on top of that, something else I want to say, because I kind of skipped over it, is so that 70%, let's say, someone needs to feel 70% joy and 30% sadness in their life. And they're escaping to 95% joy and 5% sadness as a form of false joy that is silencing the heart space and actually callousing it, in my opinion. Or maybe it's not callousing the heart. Maybe it's callousing the mind to the heart. I think that toxic positivity almost calluses the I guess you could call it it's almost like the blood vessels going from the heart over to the mind, and it's almost like hardening them so that the mind becomes less and less receptive to that flow of love. But anyway, so that being said, there are going to be people, and this is what I think a lot of spiritual people will disagree with me on. I believe there are a lot of people in this world right now who need to feel more in a state of sadness than joy. And they will still, if they are embodying what their heart wants them to feel in that moment through honoring that pain and allowing it to be felt and understood and naturally healed through that nurturing process and becoming more sympathetic souls, not only to themselves, but also to others. And I'm not explaining this nearly as well as I want to in this video. And so this part of the conversation, I really think is going to be better understood by listening to my video that's like 2 hours long. I'm sorry. You can break it up into multiple chapters if you want to. You can watch like 20 minutes at a time or something. But anyway, so, but I do feel like there are people who are going to need to feel more in a state of sadness than joy for a while. And God, if you are truly listening to your heart in that way and honoring it and honoring the vessel of love that is your soul through embodying that heart and really not just the heart, but that beautiful fusion between the mind and the heart that nurtures and values and protects love, God will reward that. You don't have to be more in a state of positivity than negativity to get rewarded. And so that might mean for you that you need to feel, I don't know, like 55% sadness, 45% joy, maybe even 80% sadness, 20% joy for a while. Not that you're necessarily going to know, it's hard for us to quantify that. Like, am I at 80% joy or am I at 20% joy? Like, it's hard to know. But you get to use your mind as a mental creature, because we're mental creatures. We get to use our minds to try to understand where our heart's coming from. So as an example, maybe you get to look at your life, and this is what I'm trying to do. I get to look at my life and try to understand, where do I feel sadness, or where do I think I should feel sadness? Where do I feel like I'm avoiding this sadness? Where do I feel like I'm clinging on to the sadness, maybe in a state of victimhood? But at the same time, where am I maybe avoiding sadness through a sense of toxic positivity and escapism? See, there are two extremes, right? There's the victim state in toxic negativity, and there's the heart disconnected toxic positivity and escapism present within the spiritual community, largely through manifesting, in my opinion. It's not all of manifesting, again, it's not all of manifesting, but you find this a lot within manifesting. Because manifesting tends to tell you that you need to tip the scales and be more in a state of positivity and positive emotions than negative emotions. And I think that is so evil. I genuinely do believe it's evil. And I think someone poisoned the spiritual community in this way. Who knows, like, when it happened, but could have been, hundreds of years ago, wherever these spiritual teachings came from. It could have been 50 years ago. I don't know, right? But at some point it became poisoned. And so anyway, so I think that, and I lost my train of thought again, but I really don't feel like going back and listening to this part right now, because I think that's part of why I struggle to get videos up, is I put so much pressure on myself and my kind of perfectionistic tendencies. So anyway, but yeah, I think that, we're not supposed to tip the scales by being more positive, more like happy than sad. I think what we're supposed to do is understand where our heart's coming from. And some people are going to, for an extended period of time, need to be, really, really happy. And some people are going to need to be really, really sad. And then, but through doing that, through honoring that, then it naturally gets heard and felt and understood. But also there's a reasoning process too, because oftentimes we become addicted to these negative emotions. Just like we can become addicted to positive emotions when out of touch with the heart, we can become addicted to negative emotions when out of touch with the heart. And so anyway, so what you want to do is try to understand where your heart's coming from. And so some people are going to need to feel, for an extended period of time, they're going to need to feel maybe 70% sadness and 30% joy. But I have an idea here, a theory here, and I believe that that's where God's grace comes in. When you're showing yourself grace and showing others grace by learning to sympathize with your own pain so that you can learn to sympathize with the pain of others, but also you sympathize with and hear your own joy so you can find that joy for others, so you can communicate it to others who are maybe in a state of victimhood. When you do that, when you offer yourself that grace, what happens is God is like, thank goodness you listened to your heart finally, assuming you weren't, which a lot of us aren't, unfortunately. A lot of us aren't listening to our heart nearly enough. God sees that, and then it's like, okay, you're maybe more sad than happy right now, but you have good reason to be sad, and you're listening to your heart, and I want you to feel 70% sadness right now and 30% joy, and you're feeling that. Let me reward you by showing you grace and maybe bringing more reason to be happy into your life. Maybe you're 70% sad and 30% happy because maybe you're really sick and someone cheated on you and you lost your job and you have all this stuff and you're on the brink of homelessness. And then God comes in and says, here's a new job for you. Here's, someone that's going to help you with your debt. Here's here's a husband. And then suddenly you don't have 70% to be 70% to be sad about and 30% to be happy about. Instead, you have 90 or 80% to be happy about and 10 or 20% to be sad about. And I think that's the point. I think we're supposed to embody the heart and understand where the heart is coming from, because it's not one size fits all. We all have different stories and we all have different things happening. Yes, we all come from God, but we all have different scenarios. And we need to learn to be sympathetic to ourselves, to be sympathetic with others, and we need to be sympathetic with others to be sympathetic with ourselves, because again, I believe in many elements of spirituality, but there are a lot of elements of spirituality I disagree with. But one of the elements of spirituality that I do agree with is the idea that we're all created as one. We're all created from God. Okay? And, so there's a sense of unity there. So the way we treat ourselves is going to be the way we learn to treat others, and the way we treat others is going to be the way we learn to treat ourselves. So we have to be sympathetic to our own heart's suffering, but also hear its joy and embody that while that love is being healed through the nurturing process. But unfortunately, what's happening in so much of the spiritual community is not nurturing it to heal it. It is ignoring it. And that's what's so dangerous. And so I guess now I'm trying to think what else I was going to say, because I'm pretty much done. I feel like I forgot something. There's one other thing I'm going to say, but I feel like I forgot something, and it's very frustrating. But anyway, I have an analogy I want to use, so I guess I'm going to get onto it with the analogy. So the analogy that I want to share is going back to that inner child. And I have a lot of analogies on my channel. Like, I have an analogy in the vilification of fear video. I have a video on my channel about how the spiritual community vilifies fear way too much. And to be fair, yes, I understand a lot of the time fear is exaggerated in our mind. I get that. But there is a genuine nature to fear, I believe, because fear is a natural byproduct of a world of suffering. But also fear gets confused because, I have two ideas on this, and I don't know that I really have the bandwidth right now to talk about the difference, but I'm going to try really quickly. And this is my tangents. I'm sorry, my tangents are what make my videos so long, but I don't really know how to avoid them, because I feel like I have to say this and I have to say this because anyway. But yeah, so fear has two components to it that I want to talk about. One, fear, oftentimes we're not taught to understand our emotions, especially our negative ones, like sadness or sense of confusion or doubt or whatever it is. And so because of this, because we're not taught that, we actually forget or don't realize that oftentimes our emotions have overlap. So what I mean by that is, like, our fear oftentimes is kind of like a knot. Like, it's not just fear. It's not just, hey, here's fear, that's it. There's an element of sadness that's tangled up in that fear, doubt that's tangled up in that fear, anger that's tangled up in that fear, sense of confusion that's tangled up in that fear. And so if you try to just say, okay, I'm going to ignore the fear, I'm going to let it go, well, here's what happens. You end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And the baby that you throw out with the bathwater is your heart in a lot of ways, because it's also attached to these emotions, right? And so fear, even if you believe that fear isn't real, and I disagree, I think fear is real sometimes, not all the time, but I'll give you credit. I sometimes think fear isn't real too, but I tend to think fear is real, but it's oftentimes exaggerated. So that being said, let's say you're of the school of thought that believes fear isn't real. I'll give that idea a chance because sometimes I think maybe you're right. But at the very least, that fear is getting tangled up with sadness. And I do think sadness is real. I do think anger is real. I do think sense of confusion is real. I do think sense of doubt is real. But fear, I think, is real too. I think it's its own emotion. But even if you don't believe it's real, we're not taught, and I want to emphasize this, we are not taught how to tell the difference between fear and sadness, or fear and sense of doubt, or fear and sense of confusion. And so oftentimes what we think is fear is largely sadness over a potential outcome, or largely a sense of doubt over what might happen. And so unfortunately, when you decide that, oh, I'm just going to ignore the fear, I'm just going to let it go, well, here's what happens. You end up throwing that baby out with the bathwater because, again, that baby is the heart space that is deeply connected to those emotions. But I believe, even though I can understand where you're coming from thinking fear isn't real, and sometimes I think maybe you're right. Maybe it really is just a mixed bag of various negative emotions. And maybe even, who knows, but at least a mixed bag of various emotions. But that being said, I do think, honestly, I do believe that right now, I believe that fear is its own emotion, because fear is not only its own emotion, but it can be its own emotion. So just like fear can be sadness over something, fear can be a sense of doubt over something, fear can be fear, right? But I think that tells us the nuance and the kind of overlap present within our emotions in general. But anyway, so fear, I do think, can be its own emotion as well. And because of this, I don't want us to ignore what fear is. But unfortunately, it's being ignored by the spiritual community, quite heavily ignored by the spiritual community. But again, maybe it isn't its own emotion. Maybe it's just sadness and confusion all tangled up together. But that being said, you don't want to throw that sadness away, and you don't want to throw that confusion away, because when you do that, you throw away the heart space, which is the baby. I said that the inner child is love, and now I'm saying the heart is the baby. But what I'm saying is, is the heart in this analogy is like the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? And so the heart and love is being thrown out because you're throwing away that wounded love, ignoring it without trying to heal it. And the heart is there to really embody love more than any other part of the soul. And I explain this in more detail in my video on the vilification of fear. So anyway, maybe I'm not supposed to try to explain this so much right now, because I've already explained it. I feel like when I start to get confused about something I've already talked about, that's why, is because I already talked about it. Maybe I don't need to put so much pressure on myself to try to explain it again. Especially when I talked about it like a month ago. It wasn't that long ago. So anyway, but yeah, so I want to get to the analogy now, finally. So the analogy is, with that inner child being love, you, as your spiritual person, who's spiritually bypassing and ignoring your heart space and ignoring those emotions and trying to be toxically positive without realizing it. Most of the time, I don't think you realize it's toxic positivity. You just think, oh, I'm supposed to be positive. Well, anyway, so what happens is you see this inner child, and the inner child, imagine a little kid, let's say a 4-year-old. You're at let's say you're at a school fair. Okay. So I used to have these, every year we'd have what is it called? The fall festival, I think, at our school. And so imagine you've got, a bunch of kids there, right? And then maybe something happens and there's something that, I don't know, there's some loud noise. I didn't really think this analogy through because I only thought of it an hour or so ago, and then I was busy talking, so I wasn't really thinking about it for too long because I was on this video not long after that actually trying to have this discussion that I've been having for the last like 30 plus minutes, whatever it is. So imagine that you're at like a fall festival, and there are a bunch of kids there, and adults, parents, family, friends, all that, right? And so you're at this fall festival, and let's say that, I don't know, maybe there's a dog there, okay? So let's say there's a dog, and one of the kids, let's say a 4-year-old, isn't even in school yet. Maybe they're in preschool, but they're not actually in grade school yet, but they're at the fall festival. And so this little 4-year-old, has a mask on or something. Maybe it's like a little, I don't know, a bunny rabbit mask, or I don't know, like a cat mask, or some mask, a unicorn mask, some mask that's being sold at the fall festival. And so you've got this little kid who sees a dog, and is scared of the dog because they've not really been around dogs, and they were around a dog one time, and it was a huge dog that barked at the child, and the child's really scared of the dog. So it sees a little dog that's just like a little puppy, not going to do anything, really harmless, really sweet, at the fall festival. Freaks out, runs away. And is running away, and that's like the inner child that's wounded. And then you have, so this little kid is 4 years old, running around with a mask on, and then an adult sees that little kid running around, and maybe this adult's a little delusional, which is what a lot of spiritual people are, in my opinion, is delusional, and that's what you become. You become delusional when you disconnect from the heart space, because love is the ultimate place of clarity, and a lot of spiritual people are disconnecting from the heart through disconnecting from and disconnecting from love, which is the ultimate source of clarity. And so anyway, you've got this adult who, I don't know, for whatever reason, sees this little kid, and I don't know, maybe this adult got knocked on the head. I don't really know where this part of the analogy came from. It just came into the analogy. But anyway, so this adult is not totally right in the head, and sees this kid, and sees this little kid with I don't know, like a unicorn mask or something on, and it's like, oh my God, what is that thing? And sees it like running around, right? Sees this little kid running around and like running toward it. When maybe that little kid's actually that little kid's running to an adult, because the little kid's like, hey, the adult's here, I need help. I don't know what happened. Maybe the little kid ran away or something. Again, I didn't think this analogy through really thoroughly. But so, this little kid's like running through this festival and sees an adult and is like trying to get help from the adult, which is like the inner child trying to get help from your mind, because we're mental creatures, trying to get help from the mind, to allow the mind to nurture, to allow the mind to fuse with the heart to nurture it. So in that sense, the adult here in this situation, in this analogy, is supposed to go and like help the child find its heart, right? Find its parents, find that nurturing, that support. And again, the analogy is a little wonky here because, again, the Divine Mother is the heart and the Divine Father is the mind. And here I am saying that the mind is like something else. But again, the analogy doesn't have to completely play out, in my opinion. It's just kind of the point of what I'm trying to say. So please bear with me. But what I'm saying is, and I guess I'm overcomplicating it. And I sometimes think, oh, my analogies need to be like completely like, this aligns perfectly with this. And it's not always going to do that, but it explains the general picture, I hope. So anyway, so you've got this child, wounded love, right? Scared of the dog. And so it's running after an adult, like, please help me. And this delusional adult, which is a lot of spiritual people right now, in my opinion, are delusional adults, no offense, but it's what happens when you disconnect from the heart. I'm sorry. Okay, it's what happens when you disconnect from love. And so they're looking at that sadness or that fear or that sense of doubt or confusion and being like, oh my God, stay away, and they're like running away from this fear, from this sadness, from this doubt, whatever it is, these negative emotions. without trying to see, hey, common sense says this is like, I don't know, way like a tiny, this is not an adult. This is a little 4-year-old with a mask on its head, and it's crying and screaming, help it. But instead, you and your ego state that is disconnecting, an unhealthy level of ego that's disconnecting you from your heart space and from love, you're out there like, oh my God, I need to avoid this negative emotion, instead of trying to nurture and understand it. And so basically that's what's going on, unfortunately, in the spiritual community, is they're ignoring this poor child that just needs help. It needs to find its parents again, but it got scared, right? So anyway, I guess that kind of explains what I wanted to talk about, and thank you. But yeah, basically manifesting is this is like a shortened version of my manifesting video, because my manifesting video is like 2 hours long, and this is going to be like 50 minutes to an hour. But anyway, so yeah, thank you. And yeah, I guess the point is like connect more with your heart and stop being in a state of toxic positivity that is disconnecting you from your heart. But thank you.